My buddy Aaron. Aaron, how are you? Let's test
I'm
that
doing
mic.
pretty good, Mark. How you doing?
I am doing fantastic. Good to see you once again. I am going to get out of your way because I know you have a ton of content. Why don't you bring your screen share up and let's just make sure that's working for you so that I can confirm that we're seeing what we should be seeing instead of all that top secret stuff you always have on your screens.
Let me find it. I'm new to connect here, so I'm looking for my. There we
No
go.
problem.
Let's see. We are right.
Go. We have something loading. And I have got Agenda, Google Cloud Storage, Firestore, and PubSub. Is that what we should be seeing, Aaron?
That yes, it is. Thankfully, you're not seeing one of my other monitors. So
That's good. That's good. That's all pictures of Mustangs, probably,
yeah, it is.
knowing
It's a
you.
bunch of cars.
A bunch of cars. All right, buddy. Well, I'm going to get out of your way. Everyone, please give it up for Aaron.
Okay. Good day to everyone. I know it's morning and night for some. So my name's Aaron Rouse. I'm principal cloud architect at Google. For the central region of the U.S. So I'm also a Gen AI specialist for speech and search. So today I was going to talk about the three services that ColdFusion integrates with, and if there's enough time towards the end, which there should be, I'm going to run through a little quick demo that uses Gen AI via API calls. I have a long history with ColdFusion. I was one of the first customers of Alaire back when it was owned by them, and I probably was dealt with it for, I don't know, 20 something years off and on. With that, I'm going to jump right into the presentation. It says there's three different services that the language integrates with. So the first one is going to be storage. And I happen to like our cartoon drawings, so I kind of stole a couple of these for the presentation. So cloud storage is object-based storage. If you're familiar with AWS, it's similar to S3, or over in Azure, I believe they call it blob storage, but it's object-based storage. It's not like a file system where you might be used to persistent disks or something on a server where you're storing your stuff, or a NAS over on the side. The nice thing about cloud storage is there's different classes to it. So you pay different amounts depending on if you're going to be accessing it all the time, depending if it's just archived, or you only need to access it every month or two. So you're going to pay a different amount based upon the class you have it at. In Google Cloud, it's always encrypted by default. It's at rest and while it's in transit. So that's also another little perk to it. And you can also use it to host images basically for a website. So you could throw website images in there, or some media in there, and you could point to it, and it can be the server for it. Here's just kind of a description of what I kind of raced through there. So we're talking about object storage right here on the left, and that's what you'll have integrated with. If you're hosting a server like a VM, you're going to be thinking of more of a block storage, which is your disk attached to it, your SSDs usually. And then if you're talking about a file store, that's usually a NetApp or some other device on the network where you keep the files. The key terms you need to worry about for object storage is really the object. That's the file. The bucket, that's where you store it, the location of that bucket, and the storage class. Location is really important because you want to have in proximity of where your application is. If you have an application sitting over in Europe, you don't want to be storing your bucket over in the US. It's just going to create a latency issue for you. And the class is what I just kind of ran through, right? Where depending on how often you're accessing that. Here I'm kind of displaying your location types, and I'm using the EU as your example. So you could just have region. You can just be sitting in a certain cloud region, and then you could go to multi-region, which goes across different regions, or a dual region, which is just it's an active setting. Typically for web apps, which is what you'd normally be talking about for ColdFusion, I would imagine you just excuse me, sitting in regional. And it's just a dual region turbo replication slide here. Excuse me, I need a drink. Here's where we get into our locational considerations, though. And as I said, you would probably want to be in regional for a web app. However, you can look through here and you can see the different reasons as why you might want to go out to dual region or multi-region. But of course, your price is going to go up but you also get more redundancy and your speed can actually go down, right? When you go to multi-region, you're going across high-speed fiber across the world, but it's still going to cause things to go down. So you probably don't ever want to go into multi-region for most web-based apps. And then from there, we get into the storage and the classes, which is very similar to a lot of the other clouds. We kind of limit it down to 4, where some of them go out to like 12 or something. Your standard is if you're just accessing it all the time. So if these are images that you, the example I gave earlier, if it's images for your website, then it's going to be in standard. You're going to have it in standard. Nearline might make sense for more of maybe like a document repository, almost like an app that's storing some documents, but they're not accessed all the time, but they're at least accessed once a month. So Nearline might make sense. Once you get to ColdLine and Archive, this is really just where you're keeping some information that you need to keep for some sort of data governance reasons or whatever rules you have in the company. But you'll notice everything kind of expands out, right? So if you put it in Nearline, you're going to be paying for 30 days, whether you had it in there for 30 days or not. You get ColdLine 90 days, Archive 365 days. So you have to be cognitive of what classes you're using, because it doesn't make sense to go into Archive if you're going to get rid of that thing in 90 days, right? You just go to ColdLine. And then you have your cost per gigabit. And then there's also retrieval fees. A lot of people don't think about this. When you're retrieving a file out of a bucket, there is a retrieval fee to pull it out. There's when you grab it, there's that retrieval fee, and there is an egress fee too on the network. So those are the things you got to think about. You don't want to throw 10 terabytes of data out there, put it on the web, publicly accessible. Everybody could get to it. It's getting scanned because now you're paying for that, right? You're paying, and you have it at Nearline also, right? It's like you could just create a real problem for yourself because one, it's getting access too much. One, you're paying retrieval fees, or two, you're paying retrieval fees. Three, you're paying egress, right? So you got to be really cognitive of it, what you're doing and what you're putting out there. Otherwise, you could end up causing yourself to have a pretty high cloud bill, consumption bill. Then you can even take into account the life cycle management, right? You can put in like, hey, the file's been here 30 days. Let's move this over to this other bucket that's a ColdLine, right? Or let's move it into Archive after X amount of days. So you can take into your life cycle management of where these files are going to sit, these objects are going to sit, and how long they should sit in each one of these containers, which are the buckets. You can even put in a time to live on them, so they can actually auto delete after a certain amount of time. And I can't remember if I have it in one of the other follow-on slides. You also can put security measures in there. So you can put it in there where you, I don't think I have versioning later on, but you can put in there that, hey, this is written to the bucket and this cannot be overwritten no matter what. So it's there, right? And it is the truth source of truth, and nothing can override it, nothing can delete it. It's just there, right? Or you can also even have the versioning, which I believe is maybe the next slide that's in here. This is our auto class, which I just described. Storage class selection, versioning. So you can take into account versioning. So if you're always changing the files and you have 6 different versions, it's just going to keep all those versions in there. And then you can go back to the different versions if you need to go back to it. So that's really helpful. I used to do this all the time where customers were uploading PDFs into applications I built, but I needed to track the versions. I had to have the different things, like for regulatory compliance, I had to have all the versions. So this would have been a lifesaver in time management and document management when trying to build that into an application and track everything and have everything there. Whereas instead, it could just be part of the object storage, and it's all the versions are there, and I know I'm compliant. It just would have helped out a lot in the complexity of those applications. There's no questions in the lobby. I know I'm racing through. I have a tendency of doing that when I'm excited. The other thing of ColdFusion's layer. Wow, Aaron. The other thing Adobe has integrated with ColdFusion is Firestore, which is a NoSQL database. It's serverless, So you don't have to worry about standing up servers. All you got to worry about is creating what they call collections, and collections are made up of documents. You don't have to worry about, is it going to be able to handle the loads you're putting on it. You don't have to worry about maintaining the infrastructure, any of that stuff. It's just running there. What you got to worry about more is how you design your collections and your documents. Each time you put something in, you're basically putting in what's called a document, and the document is, think of it as a key value pair of right here, like at the bottom. This is called a map, where it's like the JSON piece here. You can have map values inside, which are JSON objects, or you can just have key value. The biggest thing you have to worry about is you only can go up to 1 MB, which doesn't sound like much, although that is a lot when we're talking about text. But you wouldn't want to be trying to throw in, a bunch of other information in there, because you'll hit the cap of 1 MB per document. The documents are inside what's called collections. The collections are made up of multiple documents, and documents can contain collections. So if you think of a hierarchy, you think of a tree, like Active Directory. If you think of one of those things where you see those trees going down, that's how you could look at collections and documents. The thing to think about too with Firestore is every one of those key value pairs is indexed by default. So it's really fast to get information back to you, but you're paying for every document that comes back to you. So the reason I point that out is, if you end up structuring it so that it has to return 30 documents, then you're paying whatever that probably small charge is per document, but you're paying for that. Whereas maybe you only needed the data that could have been stored across 3 documents instead of 30. So you really have to take into account, how do you want to structure the collections and the documents. And there's no right way, right? It's going to be how you do the logic within your application, and how more or less you do things, right? So you can think of it though as a collection per controller or activity of the application. That's typically a good rule of thumb. You can think of it doing that, but it's definitely something you want to look at and consider. Because if it drills down too far to get information, then you're pulling back too many documents. And you also want to think about what's in those documents. So if there's any personal information or any information you don't really need and get out, you maybe want to structure the collections and documents so that all that's not returned just because you're getting the most common thing that you really need. The other thing is what I was kind of mentioning. So you have the indexing that automatically happens, but you can actually opt out of the indexing on certain fields, and that'll help out from a not necessarily performance standpoint, but it'll help out from a cost standpoint. But if you don't need the indexing there, then it's going to help out also in the overall performance and cost of everything. You can also do what we call composite indexes. So you can actually have an index that runs across collections. Those just aren't automatic. So a composite index, so I have 5 collections, and I know I'm going to be querying out information across documents in those 5 collections. Then you could actually build a composite index across that, which will then make it, run really fast, instead of having to maybe go pull out all 5 of those collections and loop through an array and pull things out and then query back and do all this other stuff. The composite will actually let you get past that. You see an example, I had some cities and categories and how they cross-reference across San Francisco and Japanese, right? It's really things to take into account, especially if you're kind of like me, who comes from a relational database background. You have to stop and think on these things, or I do, because I'm thinking in traditional SQL. I'm thinking about OR statements. I'm thinking about doing a bunch of stuff that you're not really going to do in NoSQL. So you really got to think about not normalizing your data like you normally would in relational databases. You actually want to denormalize your data in any NoSQL setup, but especially here. It's going to allow things to run faster because it is denormalized, because it is actually across, and you're not having to jump in and out of collections and in and out of documents just to try and get to some piece. One thing I just remembered that I forgot to mention, there is actually a limit on the amount of index fields per documents, but it's 40,000. So I'd love to see what you're throwing in, or if you're hitting that limit, because it sounds like a lot to me. We also do a time to live policy in Firestore. So if you do have data you're putting in and you just want to kill it off, you can do that. The last thing that you'll that Adobe added was our pub sub. So this is a global message queue system. You could underneath the covers, this is the type of thing that you could think of. You literally could take in all the information of the internet and pass it through this and send it to other pieces. So it's a message queue system. It's always a little bit of a hard one, I feel, to explain when you're thinking of web apps. So that's why I kind of grabbed this microservice architecture diagram we have. And we start off with the user. They place an order, just typical order. The order is received into pub sub. And then the order event comes over to the packaging system, which uses a SQL database in the background. Think of MySQL, Postgres over here. That ordered package event comes back to pub sub, and then we could end up going into shipping, back to customer notification, and then different notification services, which also could use Firestore, which I just talked about. I always just find it a hard thing to talk about when we're talking about web apps, because we don't typically kind of think about some of these back-end processes when we're dealing with those. One thing I like to think about when I'm thinking of PubSub is if I wanted to trap all the events that happened in the DOM of my app, how am I going to trap those, and where am I going to send it, and am I going to be waiting for those little all that processing to happen? So what you could do is you could send it to PubSub. You could just have just send a little web service in ColdFusion, have that running, send it to PubSub, and then just in the background it's just feeding out there, right? It's just going into the queue, and then you'll either push it elsewhere where it needs to go, or you'll have something that pulls it out. But you just don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about waiting for it to finish or anything else. It just let it go out there, let it do its thing, get it, either send it maybe direct into Firestore, send it direct maybe into a database, whatever you want to do with it. Just get it in there and send it over there. That's the way I always end up thinking about it. However, this diagram is probably a much better way of looking at it, because it's actually following the path through here. It is very robust, very scalable, very durable since it's global. It's completely overkill for most things, but hey, why not have more power than not enough power? That's the way I look at it. But I'm big into cars too, so I end up doing that. Here's another diagram though of looking at it. So you have subscribers and publishers to this message queue system, and within the message queue system, you have the topic and the subscription, and then the storage that happens in there. So a message will come out to the subscriber. They will send an acknowledgement that they got it, and it is marked as acknowledged. Just like a publisher can send a message to a topic, and then the subscription grabs it. It's just another way of looking through it. Excuse me. And this is another just use case. I just tried to throw a few in here because I just feel like this is just one of these things that, depending on what you're building, it can be a hard thing to just identify why would I use this. So here's just another one, right? Where it's a typical HR system where a person gets hired, there's an event message, comes into the topic, and you notice it actually fans out. So you can actually fan it out to different things. You don't have to just go to one. You can go to different things. So if we think about typical, anytime any of us been through an HR system, whether we were a contractor or employee, there was the directory service, there was the badge activation, there was the email account provision, there's the facilities to get access to it. There's all these different systems. I think you could look at it as a broker bill, but I don't really look at it. I just think more of a event system more than that. I think the one way I've looked at it is I've looked at it as if I was buying movie tickets to an event, is actually why I say that. So if you think about if you're opening up an event, you only have 1,000 seats and you have 10,000 people that want to get in there, it'd be a way of dealing with that and fanning it out to the different systems. So that's how I personally look at it. And then this is just yet another way of looking at it, just a different diagram, right? Publisher to a message, into a topic, subscription, So this is showing it, makes it implies that it's pushed out, but you can pull. You can set it to push or pull. I would say typically for a web app, you probably would set it for push instead of pull, but it's really down to your business logic and what you actually need to do with that data. A lot of people prefer to pull, so it's really going to come down to that. There is a way to do ordering, Mark, and I didn't capture it in the slide. So before it, the way we would deal with it is we would also involve our product called data flow. And so everything would go into PubSub, and then you would also run it through Dataflow, and Dataflow would ensure that you didn't have duplicates and the ordering. It could be based upon kind of the data that ends up going into the packet. So with that, I wanted to jump to what I've built out for this. Let me get this to change, if it will. Try stop sharing screen. Okay, hopefully that's showing. So what I have built out here, I just use Streamlit to get it going, but you definitely could use ColdFusion. You could really use any web app, and because everything that you call in the cloud and pretty much any cloud, you can call via API calls. So everything is API calls. So what I'm showing here is using Gemini in the back end, and it's making Gen AI calls in the back end, and I'm going to run through my AI chef is what we're calling this. So this is just thrown together, and hopefully it has no what we call demo features, which means an error screen. So the intent of this demo is to, I don't know about everybody else on this, but I'm really bad about trying to figure out what to make for a meal. I open up my refrigerator, I look at it, and I look at it, and I look at it, and then I usually drive somewhere and buy something. So really bad about figuring out what I want to eat. So the intent of this was, well, why don't we use Gen AI to study a picture of what's sitting in your refrigerator or what you took out and put on your countertop, and give us inspiration of what we could make with that, right? So I'm going to start the demo here. I'm going to be clicking through, and I have a picture that I already took, and we'll let it upload. So what's happening in the back end, this is an API, it's sending it up to the GCS bucket that I just talked about, right? And then it's actually triggering a cloud function, which is, if you're familiar with AWS, is similar to a Lambda. And it's triggering that function, and it's sending it to an API call in our Vertex AI, where you can access Gemini and Text Bison and a bunch of different LLMs. It's sending it over there. Gemini is looking at the image, and it's interpreting what am I seeing in this image, and it's going to pop up here in a second. And of course, it had to run slow because demos always run slow while you're talking to a big group of people through the internet. So usually it's not this slow. So this is where we get awkward and we start making small talk in the demo. It's about to pop up though. So right now, the chef is figuring out what's going on, what we're going to be doing, and it's going to come up with a picture. There's the picture. That is actually not my kitchen. My kitchen's a mess. I had to find a picture somewhere on the internet. You don't want to see my kitchen. But you'll notice this is a picture, right? We got some noodles, we got some butter, tomatoes, spinach, oil, just a few different things, right? It scanned this picture. And it figured out we got broccoli, butter, pasta, vinegar, oil, baby spinach, tomato sauce, sour cream, mushroom, tomatoes. It studied it. It looked at it. It figured it out, and it returned that information back to the web app. I'm going to click down here on inspire some recipes. And it is now taking those ingredients, and it's coming back, making an API call back, and it's asking Gemini, hey, what type of meals could we make with these ingredients? And if you think about this, you could actually even have your preferences like in a Firestore database. You could have your preferences of, oh, I'm vegetarian, or oh, I absolutely hate broccoli, right? You could have these things in there where it could feed off of that. Because in your prompt to the LLM, you could say, "Hey, I want to be able to make a meal out of these ingredients, but I don't like these things." Right? That could all be in your code, and you just put it into the prompt. So it came back to make pasta with broccoli and tomatoes, creamy mushroom pasta. I thought I saw a comment about mushrooms. Yeah, right there. So, anyways, and you'll notice each one of these gives a little bit of a description, but it actually generated these pictures too, right? So it actually has made the pictures here, obviously off what it's trained from, but it has made these pictures here to give you an idea, a visual of what is it we're talking about. So, and then in a little bit of description, I then come down here and click make a dish, and now it's going to come back and say, hey, um, this Aaron likes the dish that you just proposed based upon the ingredients that he has, and it's going to figure out how do we make this dish. Now, some of this is a little made up here, right? The reviews, obviously, because we're trying to pretend this is part of a live system, but it actually could even go to your review system that's part of your app and display different reviews based upon commonalities between other things that have been done, not even the exact same thing. But you'll notice we got our picture. And now it's telling me the ingredients. So it's actually telling me the amounts that I need to make this food. So it's not just the ingredients that were displayed ahead of time, but it's actually amounts. And it could go so far as it can figure out how much you have in the picture, and it could determine if you need more. Obviously this is demo, so we only go so far in our demos, but it can actually do that. It could come back and say, hey, you need tomatoes, you need 2 each, but I only saw 1. You're going to need to buy some more tomatoes, or would you like to change the recipe, right? And we get further down in here, and it actually even gives me some instructions of how to make this. But let's just say I'm not good at following instructions, or I don't like what they suggested, or I just want just a totally different recommendation. So another thing what we built is chatting with a virtual chef. So this is a chat experience with the LLM, and I can come in here, and I might even spell something wrong because I'm good at that, but it'll know I'm spelling it wrong. Like, tell me some vegetarian options. Yeah, I spelled it wrong. I was hoping I would. Hit enter. So it's figuring out what are some typical vegetarian meals that I might like. It's giving me a few options here, and what I'm going to say, it's going to remember context of what I'm talking about. So the last one sounds great. So I'm not even telling it's veggie curry, right? I'm just saying the last one sounds great. So it's going to chop it up, figure it out. It's going to tell me all the ingredients I need. It's going to tell me the instructions of what to do. And I actually could even jump back into make this dish where we just were before the screen, where it'll come through and, you know, generate everything that we just saw. All of this, though, is done through API calls. So all of this you could do from any web app, anything that can make API calls. The only thing you'd have to do in ColdFusion is you would have to authenticate with the API, which is using a JWT file, which I'm actually planning on doing a blog hopefully this month. I have everything kind of ready. I just need to clean it up. That'll show you how to build it. So you just build the JWT authentication file, and you can make the API calls into Google Cloud and use these APIs. But you'll notice it actually created a picture for this vegetable curry. It's giving the ingredients, everything that I just went through. The very last thing we did, I agree. It does look really good, and I'm getting hungry. It's almost lunchtime here. The last thing we added was just kind of an idea of like, what if I just want to build out a calendar of meals? Like I said earlier, I'm really bad. I look at what I have, and I have no idea what it is I want to eat. I'm horrible. My whole family's horrible about this. So we end up eating out too much, and that's why I have a little too much weight. This could actually build out a calendar. So it's set to a day right now, and it's actually giving me some suggestions. Hey, at 8 o'clock, let's do oatmeal with almond butter. Lunch with grilled cheese sandwich and chicken stir fry with probably brown rice at the end of the day. And you guess you could click in and drill into these things. And then we were actually thinking if we build this out more, we don't actually have a shopping cart, but you could add this to an order. You could build up an order of all the ingredients and everything you want for the week. I don't know, I'm on a day right now, but you could do it for the entire week. figure out everything you need. You could cross-reference it with what it's seen in your refrigerator via the pictures you provided, and then you can know what to go to the store or even put an order out to the store if you do deliveries to your home of all the missing ingredients you need to do your meals for the week, and you have a whole meal plan for the week. So that is my demo for Gen AI, because I know it's getting really popular with everyone. Everyone wants to know how they can use it for different things. So that was the general idea of just trying to show this creates content. This can look at pictures and figure out what it is. You can feed in your preferences, your family's preferences, whoever you're doing this for, and you can figure out what your meal plan is for the week, for the month, for the day. But it could be, you could use for all sorts of other things. That's just the general idea for this one, is our AI powered chef. Um, Outside that, I didn't build some slides, and I just realized I probably should have, because we talked about it in Vegas when I was at the conference. I know there's always a common question of how do you host ColdFusion if you want to run it in Google Cloud. So then I know Mark has some presentations on that are recorded on YouTube for that. So I can quickly say them. You would have it on virtual machines. If you're just used to traditional infrastructure, you just put it on VMs. But you could containerize it. You could run it in Cloud Run, or you could run it in GKE if you need to maintain session and state. This this demo is not publicly accessible, the one we're looking at. I mean, it may show up right now for someone, but it's behind IDP, so I think you wouldn't be able to get to it.
Yeah, Aaron, I think there were some questions earlier about people were asking about how to containerize ColdFusion in Google, like what the options are, and maybe you could speak to that a little bit more. I know you've been working on that yourself with building a few containerized workflows and workloads. Can you just kind of maybe expand out, like, what is Cloud Run, what is GKE?
Yeah. So I've actually been playing with this quite a bit. You can install it via Docker into Cloud Run. You can run it there. The biggest caveat there with Cloud Run is Cloud Run's not stateful. So Cloud Run, if you think about it, it's not even standing up virtual machines. It's not even standing up servers. It's just standing up containers as containers are needed. So it'd be great for like a blog or something. It'd be great where you don't really need to maintain session. Or if you maintain session outside of ColdFusion. So if you maintain session in Redis, or actually, I guess you could even maintain it in Firestore. If you're maintaining it somewhere else, then that's not going to be a problem. Or if you just don't need it, then Cloud Run's a great option. The way I would look at Cloud Run is I would look at it as kind of make Lambda or Cloud Functions for ColdFusion. So what you could do is, if you know how to write your code and your business logic and ColdFusion, and not like Python or some other language, you could just stand up little Cloud Run instances whenever you need it, right? So the little bit of business logic that's running out there, just shoot it over to the Cloud Run. It'll Cloud Run will spin up. You're only charged for while it's running, and then it spins down. So you can actually do quite a lot before you really see much of a bill, if any of a bill, because I think some of it's even free. So that's kind of the first route you could take. The second route is kind of the more traditional via the VMs. And the reason I bring it up even as containers, though, is you can stand up a VM and then create a container off of that and then run that container elsewhere, or vice versa. You could already have a container of your app and of the ColdFusion runtime, and that container you could stand a VM off of. So then if it's really kind of like a low usage app, not a lot of people go into it, and I don't really know what that number would be, but I would say that, just run it on a VM, because you don't need the powerhouse of GKE, of Kubernetes. And that's the last option. So if this is kind of a big app, a lot of different, or maybe even different modules and pieces and all this other stuff, you could take the containerized app and you could stand that up in GKE. Now, the really cool thing, though, is you could create this in on a VM, just like how you do in a regular data center. Just stand up SUSE, install ColdFusion, get your app running. And you're like, okay, this is running, but I'm outgrowing this. You could take that as a container and you could go put that in GKE. So the really cool thing is you can move these things around because it uses containers throughout our ecosystem. Is there
I
another
would, I
question
would,
I missed? I'm trying to scroll through, or did I?
let's see. Will this be recorded? Yeah, we had that. Yeah, Anil was asking about containers and Kubernetes, which you just covered. Um, yeah, don't know that there's any more questions so far, but hey, does anybody here have any questions? We've got almost 70 of you. So, what do you want to know from this principal architect from Google? By the way, I definitely want to see a demo of that VM to container move, Aaron, at some point, because I did not know you could go that way. I knew about the other way, and I did do that. And by the way, for people who are wondering, like, why in the world would I ever take a Docker of ColdFusion and put it onto a VM? Because I've had that question asked to me multiple times. The reason is that a Docker image is significantly smaller and easier to transport than like a VMI or a VM image of some kind. Like it's really portable. You can store it in the various storage mediums that there are in Google and use that as sort of the source to drop it into a VM. And it's super duper easy to set up. Like I was able to get it running in, I don't know, just a few minutes with literally no training or whatever. I just sort of click buttons until things work. So if I can do it, anybody can do it.
I'll definitely work on a follow up in regards to hosting everything. I actually had planned on putting out some blogs on the very subject, so I'll work on getting that done. So
Very
it'll
cool.
be easier for everybody to find it. I'll pass it over to you, Mark, so you can pass it out to other people.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah, I think that would be something because again, I think people don't think about that particular use case, right? They just and the other thing that you touched on a little bit that I think people are not really understanding is that when he says Cloud Run is not stateful, it's literally like it's a stateless containerized workload. Like you can spin that thing up almost infinitely big. I mean, you can obviously put guardrails on it for how big it'll grow based on how many people are hitting it, but it's super tunable. You can put all kinds of rule sets in there for how many people can be hitting your server. When it spins up new ones, when it spins down old ones, whether it stays hot or not. So that changes how quickly it will spin up from 0 to 100. It's something I really haven't seen anywhere else. And putting a containerized ColdFusion workload into it, if you know what you're doing with Docker, is literally seconds of work. It's not even minutes.
Yeah,
It's super
yeah,
fast and easy.
it's super fast. You just make sure you don't load all the modules because you won't need all the modules, and it'll be even faster to load up.
Yes.
One way you could look at this is you could have a Cold Fusion app that you attach a file. You send that via the Cold Fusion integrations to a GCS bucket. You can then trigger to run Cloud Run, and then Cloud Run could have Cold Fusion in that maybe or something to massage it or do whatever with it, and then the output you could then send back to the app or into your database, right? So that's what I'm kind of describing a Lambda or a cloud function there, but I'm doing it via Cloud Run so
Okay.
that you don't, if you don't have that knowledge of writing in Python or one of those other languages, you can still use your Cold Fusion knowledge, which probably makes a lot of sense in a lot of use cases. Also for some of the things built into Cold Fusion, like why reinvent the wheel to using one of those other services when you could just end up using Cloud Run and your current knowledge.
Exactly. Yeah, this is one of the very few instances of being able to use serverless Cold Fusion in a super easy way. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a free tier on Cloud Run, and it's pretty generous.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, it's
I
pretty.
played.
A lot of the things we have, and I know it showed a little bit of pricing on GCS, and I know I gave some warnings on Firestore, but there's a lot. There's some pretty generous free usages of all these tools, right? I don't think on storage, but I think Firestore has it. Cloud Run has it, and it's in the public docs. Like you can find it in there, so you can play around with a lot of this stuff and maybe not even see a bill or see very little of a bill.
Yeah, I want to say I've been playing with this for going on a year at this point because I've been dealing with the alpha of CF and we've been in Google for a while. Um, and I tend to use my own accounts, just because it's easier for administrative issues for me just to use my own accounts. I don't think I've gotten a bill that was bigger than like a couple bucks. I think the couple bucks was literally for storage because I had put up a bunch of data in it because I was like uploading, downloading, just kind of testing like speeds. I didn't get a single bill for Firestore. I didn't get a single bill for Cloud Run in the time I was using it. So it's very, very generous. I mean, obviously you do have to be careful because if your app goes viral, right? Those costs could start going up. I mean, remember you're creating new instances, kind of like a swarm, right? Each of those have a cost, and there's ingress, outgress, CPU, all that type of stuff in there. So you do have to be a little bit careful. But for just playing around and trying it out, I highly recommend people just go grab yourself a Google account and play.
Yeah, and honestly, that warning applies to any cloud. It's a
Yeah,
consumption-based model. So the biggest thing you should do in any of them is you set up billing alerts, set up quotas. You can put guardrails in on yourself, and always just monitor what's happening. Right? Don't just set something up and then not look at your bill.
right.
It's your billing console. It's your billing console. I mean. Because you can be monitoring that daily and looking at it just to make sure that, hey, I'm not running up a huge bill. um, and you just have to be cognitive of these things, but that this warning applies to any cloud because it is a consumption model, as I said.
Yeah, and the billing dashboard I feel is pretty good about telling you which thing it is that's actually charging you money. Which I
Yeah,
have to say it's not the case in other clouds. Like in other clouds, it's like you owe $30. Okay, what used it? And it's like, man, I don't know, something did. Like, okay, great.
yeah, I'm checking to see. Yeah, let me switch screens here, give you an idea of. Hopefully it'll pick. I have different Chrome instances, so sometimes not everything shows up. All right,
And for those folks that are interested in the useful links right below the chat, that link to Google Cloud Services can let you sign up for an account. And we are seeing your Google Cloud account right now,
okay.
Aaron. So
So like this is what you see when you log in, all right? But we actually have a recommendations like right here API that runs throughout everything. So apparently I have a few things running that not only is it cost based but also security and other services right here. So it's really great. That's one of the things I really like about Google Cloud is just right there at the front, right? And then you also have this dashboard here where you can get to your billing and you can get to everything else in here, and you can just have a really good idea of what's going on out there. And while we're kind of on the topic of Gen AI, one of the things we've done is we've actually built our Do It AI into our console. So while I could type here, it's over away from my keyboard. I can click there and say, hey, I want what is Firestore, right? And it's going to come back based upon the docs, and it's going to give you all this information on it and even links to the source of where it's at. uh, and this actually does show one thing that a lot of our tools have in regards to Gen AI. You can say yes, that's good, or no, that was wrong, so it can start learning off of that. So I would highly recommend coming in and playing around with these integrations that are in ColdFusion. But again, I would make sure that I watch my billing and monitor things and not let things get out of hand, because you could quickly run up a bill if you're not paying attention. Like if you go out set up a big table cluster or something and have a huge bill. Like, you need to pay attention to what you're doing and be very aware of what's happening out there.
yeah, there's definitely things that big. It's funny that you mentioned Bigtable. That's the one I usually hear about from people where the first bill they get is kind of eye opening. Like, whoa,
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's an enterprise solution. So
right?
it's got this great product, but it's for enterprises. So if you're out there just playing around, I would not be playing around with some of the big ones, because you're gonna end up running up a bill. So
Exactly.
just be aware of what you're doing. Check the docs. We have a pricing calculator like everyone else. You can estimate it out and figure things out. And there's tons of us out there who will help you with it too.
I have a quick question, Aaron. So you kind of mentioned earlier that in AI, you guys have a little playground or a sandbox or something like that. Is that actually free to play with Gen AI if you want to just kind of mess with
There
prompting
is
and stuff?
one. There is one that Google has. I'm trying to remember the name of it. I'm not too familiar with it because I'm on the cloud side. But yes, there is one. There are some limitations to it, but you could definitely play in it and work with the Gemini models and everything else that it has access to. But it's just not something that you would be able to really use for an application at the end of the day, right? Because there's
Right.
limitations, and you'll hit those limitations really quick if you're trying to point an application to it. I think it's something Studio. I wish I could remember the name of it.
Yeah,
Might be AI Studio, actually.
Gen Studio, maybe?
Google AI Studio.
There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
so but it's a good
you,
place to if you want to see like, okay, well, what kind of responses am I going to get from, from Gemini if I'm using these prompts or, I think that's something that people sometimes ask about is like, well, just how good is this particular AI? How good is this particular AI in giving me some answers to what I want to do? And also like learning prompt engineering can be kind of hard. I mean, unless you have an account with one of the other AI manufacturers, it's hard to actually get access to
right,
it. Um,
right. Now, what you can do if you set up your a Google Cloud Console, so you could go into Vertex AI, which you would just type up here on the top. I was already there, but you would type up here on the top, Vertex AI, go down to the product, click on it, and we're on the page. So what you can do is go into the Vertex AI Studio, into the overview, and you can try all these things out in here, right? So a nice thing is we'll click here on try now. This is using the Gemini model that everyone would have access. It's version 1.0 Pro. And you can go in here and you can type your whatever the prompt you want to be. Write me a poem, helps if I spell, about beer seems to be the one I always type in, and it's going to give you a response down here, right? So then you can play with your prompting. You can play with the temperature. Where you hover over there and it'll tell you what the temperature is. So there's some terminology that you need to learn when you're in here, and your tokens. So your tokens I think of that as almost like the words, like how many words is it going to give back, even though it's not a one token to one word thing. And you can see the safety settings and go down to advanced. So there's a lot of things you can do in here. And the nice thing about this, kind of going back to my AI chef example. So when you're building something like that out and you want to know how it's going to work, and before you even write your API calls, before you even do anything, you can get in here and figure out your prompt engineering and how your prompt engineering is going to work best for you, like how you want it to come back. Um, there is a way to get code here, but it's going to be like you can take the curl command and you can translate this more or less. This is actually what I'm going to do a blog on. You can translate that into a CFHTTP. So the only thing you have to worry about is that JWT piece, which is what I'm going to do a blog about. But you can take the curl command and very easily translate that over because it's just making a call via HTTP at that point.
Very
But
nice.
yeah,
Who
this
do
would
I
be a
talk
great
to?
place just to play around.
Who do I talk to add a CFML button in that get code?
That I don't know. But the other thing I was going to point out here is down here at the bottom. I'm in the language one right now, but we actually have even examples, right? So you can even go in here. It's like, oh, I don't really know what I want to do. I don't know how I want to prompt or how prompting works or whatever else. And of course, I take the one that takes a while to come up. But you'll notice like this is a lot more prompting than write me a poem about beer, right? So there's a lot more here, and it kind of gives you an idea of how to prompt. Because prompt engineering is definitely, I mean, I like to say it's like learning how, it's like talking naturally to an LLM, but it's not 100%. There is a skill there to develop and build, but it's not like a programming skill. It's more just figuring out, okay, how am I going to interface with this LLM? Because everything you think about LLMs, I know some people don't like this. I like to say it though. Everything from an LLM is a hallucination. Everything that comes back is a hallucination because it's a prediction of what is next. The hallucination's just going to be right depending upon your prompting, right? So if you leave biasness out of your prompting and other things out of your prompting, you're more exact of what you want, and you get towards what it is you need, then it's going to most likely be right. If you're very vague and imply different things and other stuff, it's probably going to be wrong. I mean, it's like dealing with a human and a lot of natures, right? A lot of us, we try to predict what you want us to say back or what the response is, but you are not always right, because if you don't communicate well to us, or we don't communicate well to someone, then that happens, right?
Yeah, and I think another thing that a lot of people are not aware of too, you're talking about Gemini here, which is of course Google's current, highlight. Like this is their top model right now, and this is not maybe something that people are like used to. Like you can actually prompt it with images and videos and speech.
Right. So everything in that AI chef demo that I showed was using Gemini. And so if you think about it, I went to get inspired. Maybe it'll run quicker, or I'm not sharing that screen. But I went to get inspired. I browsed that picture that I found of ingredients. That picture was sent in. If you think on my screen here, I just clicked on write me a creative story about this image, which is a picture of a dog, it looks like, and hit submit. So this is Gemini looking at that picture of the dog and being prompted to write a creative story about it. So if you think about my demo I showed earlier, the AI chef, you send a picture of your ingredients, send a picture of what's in your refrigerator, and then the prompt behind the scenes that you didn't see, that prompt was, create some recipes based upon the food that you see in this image or something like that, right? So you get that, and then it'll come back with the information. The information, when you were doing, if you're doing this like via ColdFusion and via an API call, the information comes back in a JSON packet, and you get a lot of information. Like there's different pieces to it that say like, hey, did it trigger any AI standards or readiness or anything behind that? And then each one of these lines is actually like a piece in that JSON. So you actually loop through it and you pull that information out, and then you make it part of a string, and then you do like paragraph formatting or something, or whatever the function is, you do that to it, and then it displays correctly what's showing on my screen for the story about the dog.
Is
But
is there a
it feeds you a ton of information in the back end.
is there currently a limit on the size of what is returned back from Gemini?
You're going to do
You know,
that in like your token limits here, right?
okay, that's the limit there. Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, I see. That's from one prompt. Okay.
yeah, one prompt. So you can limit your tokens, and of course that also impacts what you're paying, right? So
Mhm.
you take it lower instead of higher. It helps on your costs, but also like maybe I don't need, like that's a pretty long story, right? Do I really need that? Maybe let's just like cut it in half, and it's going to come up with a completely different story, but it's going to be half the response, right? So it looks like it's not half because they're really short sentences, you'll notice, but it's actually much less content. So it was just something to take into account when you're playing with these things, right? Just don't set the token limits as high as it possibly could go. That doesn't mean it's going to work better. And then you
Right.
can even go over to the temperature, right? So we could, lower it for more true, higher. You can change your temperature, and it might get like a lot more creative or a lot less creative. That's just kind of playing almost with how it's grounding in on the data and the information it got back.
Yeah, for people who are interested in seeing a little bit of a demo on how temperature can respond to your AI prompts, those of you that follow Raymond Camden on LinkedIn, he actually just did a demo on, I think it was Gemini, and kind of looking at what the same prompt would respond with different temperatures. So it can give you a little bit more information on there. We do have a question for you from Dom Howard.
I see that.
Dom asks, are there any really useful VS Code extensions that you recommend for Google Cloud?
Yeah, I don't know one that's like specific to information on Google Cloud itself, but there is the Do It AI uh, extension for VS Code, and I think it might even, you don't get me quoting on you, but don't quote me on this. I think it might be no cost right now, but that may have expired a couple of weeks ago. But Do It AI it's kind of like Copilot and all these other tools. But the nice thing about it is it's grounded in on an LLM that's just in your cloud console. So it does an API call behind the scenes up into your console. So it's built and trained off of that. And anything that you feed into it, it's not going to go out somewhere else. So it's just in your tenant, so to speak. And the reason I say that is like if you had something in the comments of your code that you don't want, someone in the basement up in Wisconsin or someplace finding, by pure chance while they're just, on the internet, that helps, right? So everything stays there in there. But I don't know if there's like an extension that's actually specific to just help on Google Cloud itself. I'm just aware of Do It AI, which is helps for programming. And while it's not interesting to me, while it's not actually, we don't say it supports ColdFusion, it is trained on all this coding out there, and it will actually help with ColdFusion because I've played around with it. So that's kind of one of the cool things about all of these LLMs. They train off a lot of the information that they're allowed to be trained off of, and so they end up knowing things that aren't even advertised as knowing, right?
Very cool. Does anybody have any other questions for Aaron? Ha! What year is the Mustang?
The one you're going to be seeing online is 1967. Yeah, I have two. I have a 1992 and a 1967.
I like the 67 for sure.
Yeah, trust me, if you saw the 1992, you wouldn't like it. It's a beater.
Oh,
It's a beat up car.
right on. Cool.
All right. If anyone has ever any questions after this, though, happy to help. You can find me on LinkedIn. It is a 289 and the 67. But I'm always willing to help on anything. A lot of people know that about me. I've been in the ColdFusion community forever. I just think it was kind of hidden from a lot of people in all that time.
Yeah, well, I'm glad we connected because I know we connected on sort of a off the wall move where you had a client coming in and you were looking for some help with that, and then it was like, hey, wait, you did ColdFusion too? This is amazing. So glad
Yep.
all that kind of happened. For those of you who want to connect with Aaron, his LinkedIn is in the useful links list there down below the chat. So click on that and go ahead and add him. All right. Well, I think we are good. Aaron, we have an Amazon gift card to give away to one lucky viewer here. So what we will do is I will have you ask a question about GCP, and the very first person to answer the question correctly wins a gift card. So what? Yeah. So give me a good question. Not too hard, but not too easy.
How do you find out that you're running too many resources and the cost? Because I know I showed that.
Okay. How do you find out if you're running too many resources and the cost? So we've got
Marcus got it.
Recommendations. Yes. Yeah. Okay. Marcus.
Not that you couldn't figure it out from different places, but that's what. Yeah, I was going.
That was. I do remember you showing that, and it did have recommendations on lowering your costs. Feels at you. Nice. Apurva,
I saw a question. I saw a question in there about Slack. I have a Slack, but I'm using that on it. In all honesty, so it would be not a great way of finding me.
Perfect. Okay. So Apurva is going to get Marcus's information to get that over to him. I want to thank everybody for coming out to this talk. It was wonderful. I learned a ton. Always a joy to have Aaron with us. Aaron did a presentation at CF Summit Vegas last year, and I think I might be able to talk him into coming in again next year. So if you want to see Aaron in person, you're going to have to fly out to Vegas and come see us this fall. And information about that will be coming out in a few weeks. Aaron, thank you. You were wonderful as always.
Anytime. Always enjoy helping out, Mark. So anytime. And sorry for slipping up a few times on makers of ColdFusion there. It's been
Yeah.
a long history for me, so it gets confusing.
Oh, believe me, I love being the senior senior technical evangelist for Alaire ColdFusion.
Hey, it
I
slips out.
it the funny thing is I do that all the time. So I was sort of chuckling because I mean that's when I started. I started on CF 4.5, like that's my
Yeah.
back in the day, the Alaire brothers.
I got you beat. We started on version 1, my brother and I.
Who
We were like customer
what?
number 12. We were like customer number 12. I thought it was like 1 point something, but we were customer number. I literally have a floppy disk somewhere of it. So
Wow. Wow.
yeah,
Okay, that is old school. I think you're the first person I've heard. I had one person that just like someone mentioned here that they were on 3.1. Drew says they were on 3.1. Um, this is the first time I've heard of somebody actually being on 1.0. Like we even came in later than that at the university. We hadn't heard of it until it was in the force. So
yeah. I
that's
actually was
wild.
looking over my shoulder. I think I have a 3.1 box version.
Ah,
I think I was
that's,
looking over, and I actually pulled it, and unfortunately they're sealed. I actually have the floppies right here. A little hard to see
oh,
because it's in a sealed envelope.
that's amazing.
Shows what I
That's
keep
amazing.
around.
I love it though. No, this is great. I
Yeah,
might have
yeah. I
to
have a long. You back then you actually made it to a CGI call, if I remember correctly, like
oh
the
yeah.
very first version. Yeah, so very long history with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was kind of replacing Perl at that point, which wasn't too
Yeah,
fun to
it was
use.
before ASP Classic. It was before Java. Your only other way was really to like use Perl, and that was a nightmare. But those are the good old days. I'm showing my age.
Ha, ha. Well, I'm right there with you, buddy. Yeah, I learned through Ben Forta books too.
I knew Ben Forta, lost touch with him over the years. So
Tissue.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah.
And kind of not a super well known fact. Ben Forta is still to this day with Adobe. He has moved on and
Oh,
he
wow.
is a senior or principal director or VP, something like that, of our education, our global education initiatives. So he's out there in the ed tech space for Adobe. Does he still have the beard? Yes, I think he does. He's still got the epic beard.
The beard
Might
of
have been more
knowledge.
epic back then. Uh, but if you look him up, yeah, you can. He's on LinkedIn. You can find him on there and follow him. He doesn't post very much, but yeah, he is still around, still with Adobe. I see him, comment occasionally in our chats when we have our global chats, and yeah, it's pretty amazing. Awesome, guys. Well, hopefully we got everything from Marcus that we needed. I'm gonna shut things down here because I gotta go do things. I will leave it to Apurva to close the shop down. But again, thank you, Aaron. It was wonderful, and